She lived in a world where names didn't matter, only the work of your hands and the truth in your heart. But the man she helped by the river was hiding a fortune and a past. This isn't just a love story. It's about the woman who chose kindness, and unknowingly, the man who would give her the world in return. The morning mist curled like soft breath over the fields of St. Orlia, a sleepy mountain village untouched by time. Olive trees lined the dusty roads, and the scent of wild thyme floated in the air. Isadora Delane had lived here her whole life, in a stone cottage just past the ridge, where she cared for her ailing grandmother and grew vegetables in the back garden. Her days were filled with calloused palms, barefoot walks, and the rhythm of seasons. She asked for nothing, not adventure, not riches. That day she was collecting herbs along the riverbank when she saw him, a stranger sprawled on the rocks, one boot missing, a gash on his ankle, and dust clinging to his dark hair. His eyes were closed, skin sun-touched, body tense like someone who hadn't rested in days. Without hesitation, Isadora crouched beside him. "You're hurt," she whispered, not sure if he could hear. His lashes fluttered. "Just tired," he murmured, "and a little lost." Elias said little as she guided him back to the path. He leaned on her shoulder without pride, every step a quiet surrender. He looked like a man used to doing things alone, yet grateful not to be. Back at her cottage, her grandmother raised a brow but said nothing. That evening, as the stranger sat on the porch with a cup of broth, Isadora caught him staring at the hills, not with awe but with relief, like he'd finally stopped running. "Where are you from?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly. In the following days, Elias stayed in the village, offering help wherever it was needed. He repaired fences, gathered firewood, and carried water for elderly neighbors. He worked with quiet efficiency, never boasting, always listening. Some called him strange, too polite, too reserved, but Isadora saw the kindness in the way he fed stray dogs and never walked past someone in need. She didn't question his past. One night under a sky dense with stars, Elias asked, "Why did you help me?" Isadora tilted her head. "Because you needed it. Isn't that reason enough?" He looked down at his hands, rough now from work but not born to it. "Not many people think like that," she smiled. "Then maybe they've forgotten what it means to be human." He didn't answer, but something shifted in his gaze, a softness, a kind of reverence. Elias quickly became a quiet fixture of St. Orlia. He slept in the old stable behind the church, ate meals from the generosity of villagers, and worked wherever he was needed. But more than that, he listened. He fixed an old man's broken gate without being asked. He carried water for a widow too proud to ask. When the village well jammed, it was Elias who climbed down with nothing but rope and will. His presence was unassuming, but his efforts were impossible to ignore. They began to see more of each other. When she baked bread, she'd always make an extra loaf and leave it hanging on the church fence. When he repaired her grandmother's old chicken coop, she brought him lemonade and wiped sweat from his brow with the same softness she gave the garden. They never named what was growing between them. It was too fragile, too early, but the village noticed. Some smiled, others frowned. "He's not from here," old Mr. Courtney muttered one day. One afternoon, while Isadora tended to tomato vines, Elias asked if she wanted to walk with him to the southern field. "The lavender's blooming," he said. The sun was low, painting gold over every blade of grass. As they walked, they spoke of small things, favorite seasons, the way thunder smells, the old myths of the mountain spirits. Then, as they stood amid the lavender, Elias turned to her. "I've been in many places," he said, "and none of them ever felt like home, until now. But not all things bloom without resistance." Whispers grew in corners. "She's too kind, he'll ruin her," said one. "No man does that much work for free," said another. Isadora ignored them until the day she overheard her grandmother coughing in the other room, saying softly to a neighbor, "If he breaks her heart, she won't speak of it. She'll just work harder until it kills her." That night, Isadora sat alone in the garden, unsure whether to feel anger or gratitude. The next morning, the village awoke to find the market square cleaned, painted, and trimmed overnight. Lanterns hung from posts. The cracked benches were sanded smooth. No one knew who did it, but Isadora did. Elias didn't ask for credit. He didn't stand waiting for thanks. Instead, he went to the garden that day and handed her a wooden box, hand-carved, inside which lay 3 bulbs of saffron crocus. "Plant these in autumn," he said. They'll bloom long after the frost. The rains came earlier than usual that year. St. Orlia's hills shimmered with green, and the village burst into its brief, beautiful second spring. Elias had taken to helping the miller repair his grain chute in the mornings, and spent evenings quietly tending Isadora's garden with her. Her grandmother had softened, though she still watched Elias with the cautious eyes of someone who had lived too long to believe in easy miracles. She didn't speak at first. The sound of the rain filled the silence. Elias knelt on the wooden boards, water soaking his worn trousers, a hand-rolled string ring in his palm. "Marry me," he said, "not because I can give you anything, but because I will give you everything I am." Her eyes stung with tears. She looked down at the ring, not gold, not silver, just thread and intention, and something in her heart bloomed. "Yes," she whispered. He stood, soaked and smiling. The wedding was small. They invited no one beyond the neighbors who already loved them and the few elders who remembered when love had nothing to do with status. Isadora wore a dress sewn by hand from her grandmother's old linens. Elias wore the same shirt he arrived in, now cleaned and pressed. They married under the great olive tree near the old chapel, surrounded by laughter, pies baked with bruised fruit, and songs sung slightly out of tune. Someone hung paper lanterns. But not everyone celebrated. Old Mr. Courtney refused to attend. Others shook their heads in doorways. "He's still a mystery," one said. "Love won't pay for firewood in winter," said another. Isadora shrugged off the murmurs at first. But when the midwife refused to share herbs without coin and the mayor delayed repairs on their cottage's roof, it became clear. The village's warmth had cooled. Elias took it in stride. That night Isadora wrote a letter she never sent. It was addressed to a man with no address. In it she wrote, "I married a man with no ring, no dowry, and no promise but himself, and somehow I feel richer than the wives of kings." She tucked it beneath her pillow. The days were harder now. Work was constant and whispers followed them like shadows. But their home, small, worn, filled with dried lavender and shared laughter, held more peace than any palace could offer. Autumn crept into St. Orlia with gold-tipped trees and the slow hush of harvest. Isadora and Elias spent their mornings gathering the last tomatoes, drying herbs, and preparing their modest cottage for winter. Life was still simple, still full of shared glances and small laughter, but something in Elias had changed. He grew quiet at night, restless beneath the stars, and more often than not took long walks after supper. When Isadora asked, he would only say, "Just clearing my head." Then came the men in black coats, strangers, outsiders. They arrived in town with polished boots and stiff smiles, asking questions at the bakery and by the chapel steps. "We're looking for someone," one said to the barkeep. "A man with dark hair, possibly traveling under a false name." Isadora overheard them in the market. Her stomach dropped. That night she told Elias what she'd heard. His expression froze. "Did you speak to them?" he asked. "No," she replied. "But they're asking about you, aren't they?" He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. At dawn, he left before breakfast, leaving only a note. "I'll be back before dusk, trust me." But dusk came and he did not return. Isadora waited by the window, her hands curled around a cold cup of tea. At midnight, she stepped outside and saw it. A sleek black car parked on the hill, engine off, windows dark. Fear clutched her throat. She rushed toward the cottage path and found tracks, fresh footprints and tire marks she didn't recognize. The next day, Elias returned, covered in dust and silence. She stood at the door, arms folded. "Tell me everything," she said, and so he did. His name wasn't Elias. It was Elijah Beaumont, sole heir to the Beaumont conglomerate, a tech empire with holdings in 4 countries. Years ago, he walked away from it all after a scandal involving the company's corruption. He left to find a life that wasn't defined by money or lies. "I didn't plan to fall in love here," he said. "But then I met you." She turned away from him. The cottage, once warm, now felt like a stranger's house. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why tell me now?" Elijah stepped forward. "Because I was going to leave again, but this time it would have destroyed me, and I couldn't let you spend your life wondering if any of it was real." Isadora's voice broke. "Was it?" He took her hands gently. "Every moment." She pulled away, tears streaming. "Then give me time to remember it that way before it becomes something else." The days that followed were hushed, brittle. Isadora no longer left the cottage unless necessary. She moved through the home they'd built like a guest, unable to shake the feeling that nothing within it truly belonged to her anymore. The garden outside wilted under the sudden neglect, lavender drooping, rosemary curling dry at the tips. Elijah tended it in silence, never forcing words between them. The villagers, sensing the rift, grew colder. Rumors bloomed in whispers. "He's a liar," some said. One afternoon, a violent storm swept through St. Orlia. The river overflowed, flooding several homes near the banks. Without hesitation, Elijah was there, hauling sandbags, rescuing a frightened child stranded on a windowsill, lifting furniture above the waterline. He didn't hesitate, didn't hide. He worked until his hands bled. Isadora watched from the hilltop, torn. This man, her husband, her stranger, moved like someone with nothing to prove, and yet everything to give. The next morning, Isadora found her grandmother sitting in the kitchen, wrapping herbs in linen. "He stayed," her grandmother said simply. "Most men with money would have run the moment you saw through them." Isadora stirred a pot of tea. "I don't know who I married." Her grandmother looked up. "You know how he treats people, you know how he treats you. Names and fortunes can be bought, but actions, that's the part no one can fake." The mayor of St. Orlia visited them days later. "There's talk in the council," he said, "about rebuilding the lower village. We need funds more than the town's ever seen." Elijah didn't flinch. "Send me the plans, I'll cover the first phase." The mayor blinked. "On what authority?" Elijah smiled calm. "Mine." News spread fast. For weeks, Elijah worked with masons, electricians, and carpenters, never from behind a desk but shoulder to shoulder in the mud. That evening, after washing the dirt from their hands, Isadora sat with Elijah beneath the olive tree. "When I met you," she said, "I didn't care who you were. I only cared that you listened, that you stayed, that you made this place kinder." Elijah looked at her, eyes tired but warm. "Then let me stay a little longer. Let me rebuild what I broke, not with wealth but with days beside you." She reached out, fingers brushing his. "Then let's start with tomorrow." Winter descended gently over St. Orlia. Snow dusted the rooftops, the river slowed under ice, and firewood cracked in every hearth. The rhythm of the village softened, but the weight between Isadora and Elijah still lingered like frost in the corners. Though they worked together daily, shared meals and quiet walks, something remained unspoken. One morning, Isadora found a letter tucked between the pages of her journal. It wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. She didn't reply. Instead, she left the house that afternoon and walked toward the hills, where wild lavender would bloom again in spring. Her heart ached, not from betrayal, but from the complexity of loving someone who never meant to deceive, yet had done so by omission. In the silence of the trees, she thought of their wedding, barefoot, threadbare, honest. And now, a man who could buy kingdoms was waiting in her garden, mending fences. She realized then, Elijah hadn't tried to earn her love with wealth. When she returned, he was sitting on the porch, coat draped over his shoulders, gaze distant. She sat beside him, neither of them speaking for a long while. Then she asked, "If I hadn't found out, would you ever have told me?" He nodded. "Eventually, I just didn't know how to do it without changing everything." She looked ahead at the village lights blinking through snowfall. "You already changed everything, Elijah, the moment you didn't run." He turned to her, surprised. "You're not leaving." She shook her head. They rebuilt slowly, wordlessly. One morning she handed him a list of supplies for the bakery, something mundane, something shared. Another day he taught her to patch a roof tile. They planted winter peas side by side in thick gloves. The rhythm returned, not a forgetting but a forgiving in motion. And the villagers noticed. Children followed Elijah again. The baker brought fresh loaves without charge. The priest invited them to the winter solstice vigil. Late one night, as stars blinked through snow-laced skies, Isadora placed her old wedding ring, threadbare and fragile, into Elijah's hand. "This never stopped meaning something," she said. "But I think it's time we choose again, not from need, not from sorrow, but from strength." Elijah said nothing, only slid the ring back onto her finger, his hands trembling. "Then let this time be for forever," he whispered. Spring in St. Orlia was not quiet that year. It came with bursts of green, with laughter and the smell of new soil turning beneath tools and hands. The river no longer slept beneath ice. It hummed with renewed life. And in the center of it all, Isadora and Elijah moved as if they had always been part of this earth, weathered, worn, and deeply rooted. It was Elijah who spoke first. They were planting roses near the chapel garden where Isadora had once picked wildflowers for their modest wedding years ago. "There's a spring festival next week," he said, dusting soil from his palms. "The mayor asked if we'd help open the celebration. I thought maybe we could do something more." Isadora tilted her head, amused. "More?" He looked down, sheepish. "Another wedding, one for everyone to witness." The town whispered, of course. But this time it wasn't laced with skepticism. It was awe. Flowers were gathered, tables arranged. The baker prepared a cake of honey and fig, and when the festival arrived, the chapel square filled with neighbors, many of whom had once doubted them. Isadora wore a gown sewn by 3 women from the village, soft linen embroidered with vines. Elijah wore a vest handed down from the blacksmith, who claimed it had once belonged to a poet. The ring was new but simple. When they stood beneath the canopy of spring blossoms, the priest smiled and said, "You've already lived the vows most couples never touch, but today you choose again with eyes wide open." Isadora looked into Elijah's eyes and said, "I take you not for who you were, but for who you've dared to become beside me." He responded, voice steady, "And I take you not to rescue, not to repay, but to walk beside through everything this world holds." That evening, after the festival faded and lanterns flickered low, Isadora and Elijah sat once more beneath the old olive tree. The garden was quiet, the stars clearer than they had been in weeks. He placed his hand over hers and said, "We didn't get here by chance." She nodded. "We got here because we stayed." And beneath that quiet sky, they knew theirs wasn't a fairy tale but something better.